It's interesting because in the past a year or two, we've really seen how social media has really been the main source for people to obtain information or particularly news about the real estate market. And whether this is a good or bad thing, I'm not going to debate that today. But the one thing is for sure is we see a lot of information spread about the housing market is largely emotionally driven, probably to get views for sure. And as a result of that, it's not really conveying information that is helpful for someone when they're purchasing a home to negotiate the best deal. So today my goal is to remove the emotion from it, really give it to you straight, real practical information, and almost explain it to you how I would explain it to a fifth grader. Not because you aren't capable of understanding, but let's be real, we're tired. We only have so much bandwidth and you don't need a statistics class. And I'm Courtney Strelzik. I'm a local real estate agent here. And on this channel, I talk a lot about things you should know if you're either moving to the East Valley or thinking about relocating here. So if that's you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Now, Phoenix as a whole, as a metro area, we are technically in a buyer's market, meaning buyers have a little bit more of the negotiating power. But this is the thing, we're really barely into a buyer's market. It's really on the cusp of a neutral market, meaning there's a neutral playing field between both buyers and sellers. So when we see this more neutral playing field, we're going to see a lot of variance in different locations of the metro area. Scottsdale is going to look very different than like Santan Valley. And then even more so the type of home. Is it a condo? Is it a single family home? What's the price point? A lot of these are almost sub-markets. Are going to have different temperaments and your negotiating power is going to look a little bit differently for each of these type of homes or regions. Now, again, considering that we're in more of that neutral market, when we look at a specific home and we're trying to figure out the level of competition for a specific home, there's really three things we should consider. First off is the location of the home. The second thing is the condition of the home. How was it kept? Is it clean? And then the third thing, which is usually the biggest impact on the level of competition, is pricing. If a home is overpriced even by about 5%, there's going to be much less competition. And something also to consider is Phoenix Metro is huge, right? It's the fifth largest city in the United States, and we have a lot of different climates, if you will, in our metro area. And we talked about pricing, condition of the home, and all of those things will impact the house, but the location, something we have to think about is what are the areas that have a lot more supply? What are the cities that have a lot more homes for sale? Because these are the areas where the market is usually better for buyers, or buyers have more negotiating power. And, as a rule of thumb, when we think of Phoenix Metro as a whole, the areas that have a lot of homes where supply outruns demand, these are mostly areas that have a lot of new construction. And the areas that have a lot of new construction are more on the outskirts of the Phoenix Metro area. You want to think like Buckeye on the west side or Santan Valley on the southeast part of Phoenix. There's a lot more inventory there. So people, buyers have a little bit more negotiating power than a city that's more central like Chandler or Scottsdale. Now here we can see actually the most competitive cities to the least competitive cities. You can see Chandler is up there, number 2. We can also see other East Valley cities like Gilbert, Tempe, and Mesa. And then, when we get further down, looking at Queen Creek. Now, one thing I really want to point out is people often assume that a less competitive market means there are cheaper homes in those less competitive markets. And that's not necessarily the case. A perfect example is Queen Creek, comparing Queen Creek to Chandler. When we look at the median sales price of Queen Creek, it's $665,000. That was the median sales price for last month. And then Chandler was $549,000. So when you look at the median sales price, homes are more expensive in Queen Creek. But then when you look at the price per square foot, your dollar actually goes a lot farther in Queen Creek. And the reason for this is in Chandler, we have a lot more condos and townhomes and more starter homes. So that brings the median sales price down, even though if you had 2 identical houses, one in Chandler, one in Queen Creek, it is going to be less expensive in Queen Creek. And that's the big thing about social media right now is a lot of people will throw out one data point and it may make a certain place or a certain home look much more expensive, but you really have to look at all the nuances and take a step back and look at the big picture to really get an understanding of what area is more expensive and which area is more competitive. And another big misconception out there too is when, Phoenix has been in a slower market, think a lot of people are aware of that and can feel that. But just because it's a slower market and it's in a buyer's market doesn't mean that home prices are going down. Interestingly enough, in the past year, we've actually seen home prices across Phoenix Metro appreciate at 3%. This is definitely a pretty low rate. It's actually slightly under the rate of inflation, so it's a very modest number, but home prices aren't going down despite us being in a very slow market. But the good news is when the market is slower, this is when you can find deals. It's basically sale season. I mean, the reason why our market is slower today is because we have a lot more inventory than we did in prior years, so buyers have options out there. Now, the key thing to find that really incredible deal, like let's say, some of my clients, they did get homes that were like 10% under list price, but it was a specific strategy. And something you have to think of first is you have to find that motivated seller. So think of someone who has to sell. Maybe it's a relocation, they had a job transfer, or something I've seen more recently too is, sometimes these properties are inherited properties and they have to sell by a certain time. So speed is more important than the overall net proceed of the sale. Now, the other thing too is you have to be somewhat flexible with the type of home you're looking for. If you're looking for something very, very specific, like let's say that you want to be in Morrison Ranch, a specific neighborhood in Gilbert, a half-acre lot. Well, there's not a lot of inventory for that. So because of that, it's probably going to be a little bit harder to negotiate a crazy deal on a very specific home like that. But if you're open to, a couple different zip codes and maybe even a house that needs like a little TLC, like a little paint, you're more likely to find that good deal. And the other thing too is when you're negotiating and you're trying to figure out the seller's true motivation, sometimes you don't know that until you actually put a written offer in. And, for a couple of my clients, I found these really good deals. We put in 2-3 offers before we really found that truly motivated seller. And this can be somewhat of an emotional roller coaster. I've been through it, so I definitely know how it feels, particularly when you're like uncertain of when you're going to be moving or where you're going to be moving. I mean, it's your home, right? So it can be a little bit emotional, but if you can regulate that, that's really how you find the great deal. Now, a lot of people that I've worked with, they can't really afford to have that flexibility of looking at different types of homes, or maybe they don't have the time or the energy to put in 3 different offers on different houses. For example, I had one family, they're relocating here. Their one son actually has some special needs, so they're very limited on time, and they need to be in a very specific area because he needs access to a lot of their resources. But the good news is we're seeing a lot of seller concessions, and this is where the seller actually gives money to the buyer at the close of escrow to either cover closing costs, so you don't have to pay or bring as much money to the closing table, or 2, which is my personal favorite and probably a more commonly utilized way, is to actually give that money to a lender and do a rate buy down. So that way, if you're financing the home with a mortgage, your monthly payment is much lower. Now, the other good news is we're in November right now, and this is the beginning of sale season for houses. Okay, because most people that are listing their homes usually have a reason they have to sell. They're that motivated seller, right? So if you're thinking about purchasing a home in the beginning of next year, it may be worth starting to shop now, actually. And if someone hasn't taken the time to actually walk you through the home buying process in the Phoenix metro area, my contact information is below. I would be happy to schedule time and just give you some of the basics on how it works here. Thank you so much for your time and have a fantastic day.